is all your latest Rangers news, guys. We've got news of Lyall Cameron ramping up the temperature ahead of the Dundee game this weekend as Dundee club officials and Dundee supporters accuse the former Dundee player of disrespect with some of his comments post-match after the Plitzen game. Also, news of a possible departure, a left back on his way out of Rangers very, very soon, according to media reports from this country rather than from Turkey, which, as we know, Turkey is never the most reliable of places to get news from. Right, okay, look, let's deal with the Lyall Cameron situation. I've got to say, I am loving the Lyall Cameron work at this moment in time. Lyall was an absolute star on Tuesday night. Probably, for me, take away Gasama's 2 goals, but Cameron was probably one of the men of the match with his performance, always offering for the ball, using the ball so smartly and intelligently, and really kind of making that attacking midfield role his own. Surely he has to start against his former club on Saturday. This lad really does show some creative quality, can play a top quality pass, and looks to have a shot and a goal in him at some point this season. I must say, I was absolutely blown. I think this lad is top class, and I think we've done absolutely outstandingly well to get a player like Lyall Cameron. As many of you put in the comments when I put the post up about Lyall the other day, you said he is a baller, and I think that is absolutely right. He is a baller. Anyway, let's look at what he's had to say that has got Dundee fans so upset. Now, we know Dundee realistically are going to struggle this season under their manager Stephen Presley, who is to management what chocolate is to being a fire retardant. It's about as much use as one chocolate fire guard, that is. But this is what Lyall Cameron has been saying. Speaking to BBC Scotland, he said, "To be honest, it's a totally different world. The speed of play, the intensity and everything is totally different. It's almost like a different world to me, to be honest. A different job now that I am here. It's a full-time football player, whereas it's a bit different in Dundee." Now, the 2 remarks that have got Dundee fans and Dundee officials so upset, and former Dundee players so upset, is this different job and I'm a full-time footballer now, insinuating that playing for Dundee is a part-time job, that playing for Dundee is not a full-time footballer, kind of in a way, I suppose, insulting their professionalism, as we know obviously that players that don't play full-time are amateur footballers. They're part-time footballers, like a lot of the non-league players in the Highland League and the Lowland League players. So obviously Lyall Cameron obviously saying here that it's very different being at Rangers to being at Dundee. I personally believe that that these remarks have been taken massively out of context by Dundee players and Dundee fans and Dundee former Dundee players. I think they've kind of taken it and are probably using it as a bit of a ramping up tool, a winding up tool for their players going into the game on Saturday. I think if you actually look at what he's actually said here, it's like a different world to me, to be honest. Yes, well, of course, being at Rangers is different to being at Dundee. Rangers is one of the biggest clubs in Europe. Rangers is the biggest club in Scotland. When you're a player at Rangers, it is 24/7, it is 365, it is intense. You are in the Glasgow Goldfish Bowl. Playing for Rangers, wearing that blue shirt, playing in the Champions League is different to anything you'll ever experience playing for Dundee. With the best will in the world, and meaning no disrespect to Dundee, to those players at Dens Park, obviously the only ground in the world that suffers from global warming. Dundee is nowhere in the same league. I mean, they don't play Champions League football. The expectation is not there week in, week out. The pressure is not there week in, week out. I think you're never ever going to have a Dundee player, judged by his last pass, or, you've got 10 minutes, go and impress us. All remarks that have been made to Rangers' new signings in the past by people like Richard Gough and Barry Ferguson, for example. And it is a different job. It is a different world. Playing for Rangers is, it is a completely different set of pressures. It is a completely different set of expectations. It is a completely different set of standards to being at Dundee Football Club. In terms of being a full-time footballer, I think, yes, whilst Dundee fans no doubt want the best from their players and put pressure on their players, I don't expect or don't see that Dundee fans would be putting the same pressure, the same intensity, the same kind of scrutiny that goes onto Rangers players. I think that's kind of more what he means by this full-time football player. Being a Rangers player is a 24/7 job. I think, probably at Dundee, and again, no disrespect to them, you probably get a bit more downtime, a bit more time away from the grilling and from the scrutiny from the fans. It certainly is nowhere near Old Firm football. Working or playing for the Old Firm is so different to anything you will ever experience in Scotland. It is just so different, and that's what he means by these comments. And I think Dundee fans and Dundee former players and some of the club officials are just getting their knickers in a twist over absolutely nothing as per. Like I said, I think it's just again going to be a case of trying to use this as a wind-up tool for their players going into the game on the weekend. I mean, let's heaven say they do need it. They're a pretty poor team this year under a very poor manager. And, to some degree, there's an element of truth in it, realistically, outside of Rangers and Celtic, probably Hearts as well. And Hearts, Hibs and Aberdeen, I suppose you could probably include them in this as well. The rest of the teams in Scotland are a bit amateur, really, compared to, the way they play, the way they conduct their business. I mean, Dundee especially, you've only got to go back to the stadium, the cancellation debacle, the postponement debacle with their ground to see what an amateur outfit they really genuinely are. So, there is perhaps a little bit of an element of truth in that full-time nature, that full-time quip that Lyall Cameron has made in this statement. But like I said, I do think a lot of it is just taking stuff, running with it and blowing it out of all proportion by Dundee. But interesting nonetheless from Lyall Cameron. And I'm sure that Lyall hopefully will start on Saturday against his former club, and he'll certainly turn up the pressure, and he'll certainly put Dundee under pressure. And I'd love to see him go out there, really perform and really show Dundee, that he has made the right choice, that he's gone to a much bigger club, that he has gone to a club where he can be successful, a club that actually has ambition to actually play football rather than just kick the shit out of the opposition. Obviously Saturday 5:45 kickoff, and I hope that largely the same team that played on Tuesday night plays again on Saturday. Perhaps rest Sama for Mikey Moore. I'd be interested to see Mikey Moore play. Certainly hope the back four stays the same. And I hope Cameron, Rothwell and Raskan, I think, for me in the midfield. But I certainly hope Cameron gets his start. Right, let's move along a little bit and talk a little bit of Ridvan Yilmaz. So, look, I think it's fair to say that Ridvan Yilmaz is seen as surplus to requirements for Russell Martin. Russell Martin has, of course, started off by playing Max Aarons at left back in a number of games, and there was even talk of trying to convert Bailey Rice into a left back. Bailey Rice is actually left-footed. I did read something this morning he's saying that this summer that they tried and attempted, and I don't know whether it succeeded, I think it obviously hasn't, to make Bailey Rice a left back, which I think is an interesting one considering that he was described as one of the best young sixes in Scotland. It's quite an interesting thing there from Russell Martin. But Martin has shown that he is willing to let youth have a go, with obviously Finlay Curtis getting in there, obviously the signing of Mikey Moore, etc, etc. However, Ridvan, I like Ridvan. I think Ridvan is a good footballer. I think Ridvan is very good at what he does. Defensively, he is sound. Going forward, he is very good. He's quick, he's direct, he's strong. He's a good footballer. However, I think, he's never really kind of fulfilled his potential at Rangers for a number of reasons. One, his fitness record is largely shockingly bad. He misses so many games every single season. And secondly, I think his physical size, he does struggle to some extent with the physical side of the game in Scotland. And that certainly has held him back. Now, there's been talk since he joined, right back, you go right back to when Gio signed him, of him returning to Turkey and returning to his former club, Besiktas. Certainly, reports are appearing to indicate that he will be going back to Besiktas this summer. The Scotsman and a number of other sources reporting that a deal has been agreed between Rangers and Besiktas for the player. Reports say that Besiktas were leading the race for the left-back signature, and it seems that there is obviously saying that one reporter said there is a full agreement between Besiktas and Rangers for a deal for the player, although this is thought to be not 100% accurate as of yet, but apparently is getting closer. again, he's someone who's divided the fan base. There's fans like myself who really like Ridvan and what he brings to the club. There's other fans that don't rate him at all and think that he's been a disaster of a signing. In fact, former Rangers player Derek Ferguson, speaking to Ibrox News, said, "He's never been one of my favourites. There were others in Scottish football at the time who could have done a good job. He was touted with a move to Turkey within 6 months of arriving here. I don't know him personally, but he's another that needs moving on at what will be a loss." And apparently it will be a substantial loss on the fee paid for him. But look, I think, whilst you would obviously always want to get back what you paid for a player, there's times when you've got to just look at it and cut your losses and say, okay, fair enough, that's it. Let's cut our losses on this one and say, he needs to move on. We need to let him move on. Let's just do it. So there we go. That's where we're up to with Ridvan. Looks like a deal will be agreed as we obviously not only bring players in but seek to clear the decks somewhat and get rid of some of those players who are deemed surplus to requirements. Certainly. Now, there's still obviously reports coming from Spain that we are in talks with Real Betis left side centre half and left back Nobel Mendy. Looking to fend off interest from Rayo Vallecano in the player. Club Bruges are potential opponents in the next round of the Champions League. Bruges winning 1-0 away from home at Salzburg, which I think probably puts them in the box seat to qualify to play us in the next round. I do think Club Brugge, as we saw in that friendly, will be a major step up in class from Plitzen and Panathinaikos. They are also believed to be interested in Nobel Mendy as well. So Rangers will face a fight to get that one over the line. But interesting times nonetheless. Guys, let me know what you think of the two stories we've covered in this video. Thank you for watching Glasgow Rangers Nation, guys. As always, if you've enjoyed the content, please like, comment, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.